Tucked deep within the Sierra Nevada mountains, far from the noise and chaos of city life, the Keddie Resort in California once promised peace, solitude, and a fresh start for families looking to rebuild. But on one cold spring night in 1981, that promise was shattered in ways no one could have imagined. In the early morning hours of April 12th, Cabin 28, a modest wooden structure meant to offer comfort, became the silent witness to a crime so brutal, so baffling, it would grip the nation and leave seasoned investigators questioning everything they thought they knew. Inside were the bodies of Sue Sharp, a single mother working hard to create a better life for her children, her teenage son John, his friend Dana Wingate, and signs of a struggle that pointed to something far more sinister than a random act of violence. But what exactly happened that night? Why were some victims targeted with such brutality, while others in the same house were left completely unharmed? Who were the mysterious figures reportedly seen around the cabin in the days before the murders? And what did they want? How did the killers enter without waking the entire household? And why, after decades, do so many critical pieces of evidence seem to have vanished or been ignored? These are just a few of the disturbing questions we'll explore as we retrace the events surrounding one of the most haunting unsolved crimes in American history. A case filled with overlooked clues, conflicting testimonies, and a trail that seems deliberately blurred. Could the truth have been hidden in plain sight all along? And if so, why? As we go deeper into this investigation, we'll uncover strange coincidences, shadowy suspects, and a trail of fear that still lingers in the quiet corners of Keddie to this day. The answers may be buried in the silence, but some questions refuse to stay hidden. Stay with us as we delve into the mystery of Cabin 28, what really happened inside that night, and why the truth still hasn't surfaced. A quiet cabin, a small mountain town, and a night that would end in unthinkable violence. This is Derrick Investigates, and I'm Derrick. Tonight we're diving into a case that still unsettles even the most seasoned investigators. The Keddie Cabin murders, a brutal, unsolved crime that shattered a family, stunned a community, and left behind a chilling trail of silence and suspicion. 4 people, including a mother and her teenage son, found murdered in a remote cabin. 2 young children asleep just feet away, left unharmed, and not a single call for help was heard. Why were certain victims targeted with such brutality? Why were key witnesses never fully questioned? And how did vital pieces of evidence simply disappear? Was it a personal vendetta or something far more calculated? Were the killers known to the family or hiding in the shadows of Keddie long before that night? If these questions keep you up like they do me, be sure to like this video and subscribe. Your support helps bring attention to cold cases still begging for answers. Now, let's step back to April 1981, to Cabin 28, where behind closed doors the night whispered a secret that's never been fully heard. In the quiet town of Keddie, nestled deep within the Sierra Nevada mountains of Northern California, life moved at a slower pace. It was the kind of place where doors were left unlocked, neighbors waved from dusty roads, and the tall pines offered a comforting sense of isolation. For those seeking a fresh start or a quiet escape, Keddie's rustic cabins promised just that. One such family was the Sharps. Sue Sharp, a single mother of 5, had recently relocated from Connecticut, hoping to rebuild her life. Things hadn't been easy for Sue, but she was determined. With limited means and unshakable resolve, she worked to create a safe and stable home for her children. On the evening of April 11th, 1981, the Sharp family settled in for what should have been a typical night in Cabin 28. Sue was home with her 15-year-old son, John, her daughter, Tina, and 2 of her younger sons, Rick and Greg. Also present were Dana Wingate, John's friend, and Justin Smart, a neighborhood child staying over. The air outside was crisp. Inside, the cabin was still. There was no sign, no hint of what was to come. By morning, everything had changed. 3 people, Sue, John, and Dana, had lost their lives. Tina, gone, vanished without a trace. Even more baffling, 3 young boys had been sleeping in the next room. They were unharmed. They claimed to have heard nothing, So what happened inside cabin 28 that night? Why was there no sound of a break-in? Why were the boys left untouched? And most haunting of all, where was Tina? What kind of person or persons could carry out such a calculated act and leave behind so many contradictions? Why was there blood on multiple surfaces, but no clear trail leading in or out? Was this random, or something deeply personal? We'll revisit these questions as the investigation unfolds, especially the disappearance of Tina, which adds a chilling dimension to an already puzzling case. But for now, picture this. It's just after sunrise on April 12th. Sheila Sharp, Sue's teenage daughter, returns from a sleepover at the cabin next door. She steps inside and comes face to face with something no one should ever have to witness. 3 lives lost. A haunting silence. Her screams shattered the morning calm. Neighbors rushed in. Help was called. But the scene had already been disturbed, and from that moment on, the investigation would be clouded by confusion and critical missteps. What began as a hopeful new chapter for one family quickly turned into one of California's most haunting unsolved crimes. Cabin 28 held secrets, some visible, some hidden. And as we go deeper, we'll uncover not just the questions investigators couldn't answer, but the ones they may have never asked at all. Because in Keddie, the silence that night may have hidden more than fear. It may have hidden the truth. The events inside Cabin 28 didn't just shatter one family. They shook an entire town. News of the horrific scene spread quickly. Who would do something like this? And why? Sue Sharp, her teenage son John, and his friend Dana were found lifeless. But Tina, Sue's 12-year-old daughter, was missing. No note, no explanation, just gone. It wasn't just the loss, it was the way it had happened. This wasn't a burglary gone wrong. This was something else. Inside the cabin, investigators found signs of a violent and targeted attack. Sue had been restrained, her body discovered near the living room couch. John and Dana were found nearby, their injuries severe. The choice of weapons, a hammer and a knife, and the extent of the trauma left no doubt that this was intentional. Calculated. But the strangest part? 3 young boys, Rick, Greg, and their friend Justin, had been sleeping just feet away in a side bedroom. They were completely unharmed. When questioned, they claimed to have heard nothing unusual. Not a scream, not a sound. Why were they spared? Had the killer or killers deliberately chosen who to harm and who to leave behind? Even more confusing, there were no signs of forced entry. The cabin door hadn't been broken down. Nothing valuable was taken. This wasn't random, it felt personal. But to whom? And what about Tina? At first, investigators wondered if she had simply run off in the chaos, but that hope quickly faded. Her disappearance became the darkest thread of all, turning this case from a triple homicide into a haunting mystery. A few partial fingerprints were recovered, unmatched and unexplained. A neighbor mentioned hearing odd noises that night, but couldn't provide details. The more questions authorities asked, the fewer answers they found. Was this the work of someone close to the family, or a stranger who had slipped into Keddie unnoticed, then vanished just as easily? Whispers began spreading. In a small town, rumors traveled fast and cut deep. Was the killer someone they all knew? The fear was real. People started locking their doors for the first time. Some wouldn't speak about the case at all. Others couldn't stop. The investigation would stretch on for years, filled with dead ends, missteps, and secrets that refused to stay buried. Some leads looked promising, until they didn't. Suspects were named. Alibis were shaky, but nothing stuck. And above all, one question refused to die. Where was Tina Sharp? And was she still alive? We'll revisit all of these threads as we move deeper into the investigation. The missing child, the missed clues, the chilling silence that hung over Cabin 28 long after that April night. Because what happened in Keddie wasn't just a tragedy, it was a puzzle, and someone still held the missing pieces. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, the investigation into the Keddie Cabin murders began to lose momentum. What had initially sparked a wave of urgency and fear across Plumas County was now becoming a puzzle with too many missing pieces and too few explanations. What made the case so confounding wasn't just the brutality, it was the precision with which the perpetrators seemed to vanish, leaving behind traces that raised questions, but no clear answers. Detectives worked tirelessly, reviewing every inch of the crime scene, interviewing residents, chasing leads that surfaced both locally and from outside the area. Yet the more they searched, the more the case seemed to resist resolution. A single bloody handprint found inside the cabin didn't match any of the victims, but without advanced DNA tools available at the time, there was little more that could be done with it. It remained a haunting mark, possibly left by the killer, possibly by someone else entirely. To this day, its origin remains unconfirmed. The most disturbing development was still Tina's disappearance. Her absence was no longer considered a possibility, but a deeply unsettling reality. With no sign of her body, belongings, or movement in the surrounding area, investigators began to suspect that she had been deliberately removed from the scene. Was she abducted because she saw something? Or was her removal part of a premeditated plan, one that went beyond the initial violence? As the investigation pressed on, multiple theories began to surface, some grounded in evidence, others fueled by speculation. One particularly persistent theory revolved around the possibility of a personal motive. Sue Sharp, a single mother who had recently left an abusive relationship, became a focal point in this angle. Some believed that someone from her past may have held a grudge, perhaps even one strong enough to drive them to violence. Yet, despite scrutiny, no direct link could ever be established between her former husband or anyone from her previous life and the events that unfolded that night. Meanwhile, other individuals in and around the town came under suspicion. A handful of locals, known to authorities for their own troubled histories, were questioned. Rumors surfaced about a group of men seen near the cabins around the time of the crime, men whose presence didn't fit with the usual quiet of the area. Though intriguing, these reports never led to a firm conclusion. No arrests were made, no solid connections were confirmed. What added to the difficulty was the isolated nature of the crime scene. Keddie was not a place you passed through by accident. This detail kept circling back to one theory investigators couldn't ignore, that the killer or killers had known the family. The violence wasn't random, it felt deliberate, chillingly deliberate. Despite a steady flow of tips and public interest, the investigation slowly began to lose traction. Leads dried up, witnesses recanted or disappeared into anonymity. Years passed, and with each year, the hope of solving the case seemed to dim. The trail, once heated by public outcry and media pressure, began to go cold. But it never disappeared. Because there were still unanswered questions, questions that refused to fade. Why was Tina taken? Why were some family members left unharmed? And who, despite the passage of time, still carries the secrets of that night? We'll return to these questions later as we explore the possible suspects, new discoveries, and the quiet breakthroughs that have surfaced in recent years. Hints that the truth may not be as far buried as once believed. The investigation into the Keddie Cabin murders stretched on for years, with moments of renewed hope often followed by quiet frustration. Law enforcement remained committed, but the deeper they looked, the more the case seemed to shift just out of reach, like chasing shadows that refused to take shape. In 1984, a new lead briefly reignited momentum. An informant named Martin, himself a convicted felon, came forward with information that had not been made public. He claimed that a group of men had been involved in the killings, and what stood out was his mention of specific details from the crime scene, details only someone with intimate knowledge might know. Martin's statement aligned in part with earlier reports of multiple unknown men seen near the cabin around the time of the murders. The idea that this wasn't the work of a lone individual gained traction. Still, as promising as the tip seemed, it led to more questions than answers. The men Martin referred to were never conclusively identified, and the trail, once again, began to blur. A year later, in 1985, the focus shifted to a man named James Jim Cates, who had lived in the area and had known Sue Sharp. Given the personal connection and circumstantial factors, some believed he may have had a motive. But despite lengthy questioning and investigation, nothing definitive tied him to the scene. In the end, the case against him was quietly set aside, and yet another promising lead faded into uncertainty. The years that followed brought little progress. The case drifted into the background, but it never fully disappeared. Then, in 2004, another potential break surfaced, this time from someone who had been a teenager at the time of the murders. A man named Bo B came forward, telling authorities that years earlier he had overheard a disturbing conversation in a bar. According to his account, his father and another man had spoken openly about the murders. One of the names Bo mentioned was Don, whom he believed was directly involved. Though investigators took the claim seriously, the lack of supporting evidence meant the account could not be confirmed. The lead joined the growing list of possible truths, each one intriguing, but none strong enough to bring closure. Over time, theories around the Keddie case multiplied. Some believed it was a crime driven by revenge, others suggested a robbery gone wrong. There were whispers about personal vendettas and unresolved tensions within the small community. Yet no theory was ever able to rise above speculation and deliver solid answers. The reasons behind the crime, why the victims were targeted, why Tina was taken, and why the scene seemed both chaotic and calculated, remained unclear. As years turned into decades, key individuals in the case either passed away or moved on, their statements lost to time. With each passing year, the possibility of new evidence emerging seemed to narrow. And yet, the case remains open, a haunting file that continues to live in the archives of Plumas County. There are still many lingering questions. Who were the men seen near the cabin that night? Why were some people spared while others were brutally attacked? And could there still be someone out there holding a piece of the truth they've never revealed? We'll revisit some of these leads and suspicions later in our investigation, especially as we explore how new technologies and fresh eyes have attempted to shed light on this enduring mystery. Because while the shadows surrounding the Keddie murders have long seemed impenetrable, some believe they may not stay hidden forever. Just when it seemed the Keddie Cabin murders might fade entirely into history, becoming yet another unsolved file gathering dust, an unexpected voice from the past offered what appeared to be a new direction, one that stirred both hope and unease. It was 2004 when Bo B, then an adult but a teenager at the time of the killings, stepped forward with information he had long kept to himself. He told authorities that years earlier, inside a dimly lit bar, he had overheard a chilling conversation. Two men, one of them his father, spoke in hushed tones about the Keddie murders. They named someone Bo remembered only as Don, hinting at his involvement in the violent events of that April night. This revelation arrived decades after the fact, and naturally, it raised difficult questions. Could this be the missing piece investigators had sought for so long? Or was it just another whispered rumor in a case already tangled with speculation? Authorities took the claim seriously. They revisited case files, cross-referenced names, and compared timelines. For a moment, it seemed the shadows might finally start to part. Yet no physical evidence connected Don to the crime scene. No fingerprints, no confirmed presence, no witness accounts to place him at Cabin 28. Bo's memory, though sincere, lacked the clarity needed to turn suspicion into something actionable. Once again, the investigation reached a frustrating standstill. As law enforcement grappled with the lead's limitations, the broader case was taken up by federal agencies. The FBI became involved, and advancements in forensic science brought hope that modern technology might extract new meaning from old evidence. Yet, even with fresh expertise and improved tools, nothing conclusive emerged. DNA samples were reanalyzed, witness statements reevaluated, and timelines reconstructed, but the silence of the evidence held firm. The Keddie community, meanwhile, endured the weight of uncertainty. For decades, residents had lived with quiet unease, aware that the case remained unresolved. Candlelight vigils and memorials became acts of remembrance and quiet protest, signaling a collective refusal to let the victims be forgotten. For the surviving members of the Sharp family, particularly Sue's children, the lack of closure became an enduring part of their lives, an unanswered question that followed them into adulthood. Despite the passage of time, some facts now seem clearer in hindsight. Martin, the informant who once claimed knowledge of the crime, remains a figure of interest. though never formally charged. His connection to another suspect, John Bo Bubaid, a known associate who briefly lived with Martin, added layers of complexity to the case. Both men have since passed away, taking any undisclosed truths with them. Were they involved directly, or did they merely know more than they ever admitted? That question, too, remains open. Theories continue to swirl. Some still believe it was a personal vendetta, perhaps against Sue Sharp herself. Others argue it was a robbery turned violent, or a dispute that spiraled out of control. And then there's the more disturbing possibility that it was a premeditated act, carried out with disturbing precision, and protected for years by silence and fear. As for the man named Don, investigators could never find him, or prove he existed beyond Bo's recollection. Was Don real? A nickname? A red herring? That uncertainty joins the list of lingering questions. Why was Tina taken from the cabin while others were left behind? Were the group of men seen that night simply bystanders, or something more? And why, after all these years, has no one stepped forward with definitive proof? We may never know. The Keddie Cabin murders remain, to this day, unsolved. No arrests, no confessions, just a cold trail, scattered leads, and lives forever altered. Yet even in the absence of answers, the search continues, not always in official files, but in the minds of those who still care to remember, question, and revisit the darkness that descended on Cabin 28. Sometimes, justice arrives late, sometimes, not at all. But the story isn't over, because as long as someone is still asking what really happened that night, the case, in some way, remains alive. The Keddie Cabin murders remain one of the darkest and most baffling cold cases in American history. 4 lives were taken in a brutal act of violence. No arrests, no convictions, only silence, and a string of unanswered questions that still echo through the forests of Keddie. Could the killers have been caught? Was the truth buried beneath fear, silence, or something more sinister? And most haunting of all, did someone in that quiet community know what happened and choose to look the other way? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the shadows. Here at Derrick Investigates, we dive deep into the mysteries that refuse to fade, giving voice to the unanswered and asking the questions others won't. Do you believe justice will ever be served in the Keddie case? Or is this a secret that died with those who knew the truth? Drop your thoughts and theories in the comments below. We want to hear what you think. If this investigation left you wanting more, make sure to like, subscribe, and tap the bell icon so you don't miss our next deep dive into the chilling, the unexplained, and the unresolved. Until next time, stay sharp, stay questioning, and never stop digging. I'm Derrick, and I'll be back soon with another investigation